Chris, I think you're up first.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Chris Schock. I'm a member of the board of Great Lakes Urban, and I'm a native of Cleveland, actually, and urban planner and development economist by training. And today I'm retired after many years in the trenches, I guess, of public service, some in Ohio. So today's topic is certainly hits home. I really appreciate the hands-on work of Great Lakes Urban. It really connects people to their communities and neighborhoods and strengthens efforts of people's camaraderie in their neighborhoods. Our quarterly lunch and learn sessions like this are a way to share best practices in the neighborhood flourishing efforts, and really an opportunity to interview practitioners and thought leaders, across the asset-based community development movement. So it's certainly my pleasure to introduce Eric Smith, our moderator and executive director at Great Lakes Urban, and he's been working in the ABCD movement, connecting communities in places as diverse as Uganda and Appalachia for more than 2 decades. So welcome, Eric, and welcome everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And I should say, Chris is piping in from Spain, so I should say gracias.
Let's see.
And to the rest of you joining us today, a very warm welcome. We are so glad that you're with us. I am especially excited about today. We will be visiting with Mario Davison, Tony Cheney, and Deanna West-Torrence. And as far as I'm concerned, these are superstars. I am inspired by them every day. I've had the chance to work with NECIC, the Neighborhood North End Community Improvement Collaborative, for 2 years. And I just am inspired by you, and it's a delight when I'm around you. And so to share this with the rest of the world is just fantastic. So I am really looking forward with all of you listening in to learning from this conversation. Thanks for letting me be a part of this. So we'll turn to a couple of logistical issues just to make this the best experience possible for you. On your viewing screen at the top right, there's a little view icon, and if you click on that, you click, and then from there you click on gallery, the gallery option. That means that you'll be able to see all 4 of us on your window, in that window, and that'll make this feel more like a conversation. That's what we want this experience to be, as a conversation. The second thing I would say is that if you look at the bottom of your screen with your cursor, you'll see there's an option called Q&A. As we go through this, you may have questions. Our conversation may bring up questions, and at the end of the session, we'll open that time up for your questions. And so please use that Q&A option for that. And finally, you are going to hear us, and you already have heard us say asset-based community development. Sometimes we say ABCD a lot. And so I just want to very briefly explain that. This is a set of principles and practices that really harness inside-out community building in neighborhoods and communities and cities. It's a philosophy of engaging people where they live in their place, and building care and the responsibility of local resources, local assets. And it's very asset-based, it's relationally oriented, it's inclusion focused, and it's very much community driven. And we just really believe in this philosophy, and we've seen it work in multiple communities we serve with Great Lakes Urban. And so with that introduction, I'm going to turn now to some questions. But first, I'd like to invite our panelists to say a little bit more about themselves. And maybe I can start with you, Deanna.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Eric and Chris, and for the opportunity to speak to you all today. As you said, my name's Deanna West-Torrence, and I'm the founder and executive director of the North End Community Improvement Collaborative, or NECIC for short. I started this, actually the NECIC journey probably started around 2005 or 6 with a group of concerned residents. I lived in that neighborhood, and it's a neighborhood where 5 generations of my family lived. over time. And so we saw that declining, and I just saw an opportunity for us to reshape our neighborhood at that time. So
Thank you. Tony, would you be willing to go next?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Eric, for having us. Yeah, my name's Tony Chinney. I started with the organization in 2007 when the work really kind of began in earnest. I was Deanna's very first intern and kind of arguably the first staff member. My background, I have a degree in history from the Ohio State University. I've been a lifelong resident of Mansfield, other than a brief stint where I lived in Boston. Yeah, it's been a long, interesting journey.
That's great. And Mario, we're up to you.
My name is Mario Davison. I am a community organizer here at NECIC. I grew up on the north end of Mansfield, where we primarily serve. I live like in the heart of the neighborhood that I grew up in the heart of the neighborhood that we serve. I went away and got my bachelor's degree from Kent State. Once I graduated from Kent State, I went and got my master's in human and social services leadership from Mount Vernon and Nazarene University. And since then, I have been back at NECIC for about a little bit over a year now. I think I just had my anniversary.
Congratulations. Should we sing happy anniversary to you? Or? No, but really, so grateful for all of you for joining us. Like I say, it's always been a delight every time I've been passing through Mansfield. Deanna, could we come back to you and maybe just give us a little more detail, give us a little bit more of a sense of the context of what's the North End neighborhood that you've had, these 5 generations living in, and what is Mansfield, Ohio? What is it about? And NECIC, what do we need to know? And your mic's on and are off, and I apologize.
sorry about that. You might have to remind me about that a time or two. The North End, as we define it, is about a quarter of the city. There are just under 8,000 residents in the North End, in a city of about just over 47,000. It's a neighborhood that experienced a lot of decline over the years. It was a heavily industrial area. Lots of people lived in the neighborhood who worked in local factories. It was a solidly middle-class neighborhood, as my parents were growing up. And then around the mid-70s, we really started seeing a decline, not only in a lot of the industry here, but it really began to affect the neighborhood through the closure of many, many schools. I think that was the first thing that I ever noticed, was how many of our elementary schools closed. I think there were 7 in our area, as well as the only middle school that was also located over here. So I think that the closure of those schools and the decline of the job base here really, really affected the neighborhood. And it started becoming evident through blight. I think that was the first thing. Blight and just a number of other conditions that started to worsen over the years. So I had moved away and come back in the late 90s, moved away to Cincinnati, Ohio, and I came back with, I was married and I was getting divorced and had 4 young children, and we were moving back into the house that my family had. And in doing that, it seemed to be a much different neighborhood, and it also seemed to be a lot more dangerous in terms of things that my kids would be getting into as they were older. They were young at the time. So I started working at a neighborhood center in community health and started seeing where all these different things were intersecting. I also became a city council person during that time, and it was through these different roles and jobs that I had that I started looking at the neighborhood that I lived in a much different way. When you're with a council person, you're looking at it through like public infrastructure, sewers and police and fire and things like that. But in my day job, I was looking at it in terms of infant mortality and low birth weight, working with the Community Health Access Project. And then over the years and throughout the evolution of NECIC, I would later serve on the school board and really get to see where all of these different things were intersecting. The idea to start NECIC initially started with me as a council person and recognizing that we needed a plan. We needed to plan our way out of what we were seeing. And that is why Tony Chinney became really critical. And he can talk a bit more about that. But it was really, I would say what the original vision was that there was a plan that was resident driven and that would kind of show the intersection of jobs and schools and housing and health and all of those different things. So the plan is, I think, how it started, but along with the plan, our native son, Richland County, is John McKnight, the founder of ABCD. And I picked up a book at the neighborhood center one day of his and started reading it and was just blown away. And we decided very early on as an organization, as we were getting those first residents together, that we wanted to look at the North End not from a place of loss or from as a void or a drain, but as a place of capacity, and that there were things that we could anchor onto and we could kind of pull ourselves out of the situation. So with a good vision, a good plan, residents, a good surrounding board, but both North End and outside, that was really key, that it was a very isolated community. And so by fostering those relationships and then really looking at our community from a glass half full perspective was kind of how we started. And I'm happy to say that has trickled beyond the North End. You will hear our community leaders talk about assets here now. The language of our entire county has changed. And we do not look at ourselves as a county, I think, even in the way that we did even 5 years ago. And I would like to say that a lot of that started with NECIC.
Yeah, I have no doubt. But that is an interesting part of the story here. I just love the fact that, so John McKnight and Jordy Kretzman did this extensive research project, and they were the ones who coined, back in 93, coined the term of asset-based community development. And it's amazing that it's become a national, international movement at this point. And I believe you studied under them back when they were doing the ABCD Institute in Northwestern University. So I just wonder how do you describe ABCD to someone new to the work? Deanna, yeah, let's stick with you for a second.
I would say that we describe it again as just looking at the capacity of our residents. Initially, I think there were, we do the circles, the institutions, and the associations, and we really brought that to life and see that. I mean, we speak about that we'll say, a meeting with the circles or a meeting with the triangles, and really trying to embed that in the culture of not only our organization, but like I said, in the community. They may not use those same words, but really boiling it down to ABCD to us basically was building on what we have. And that is the aspirations of residents, the talents, and their contributions. We boil it down, like when Mario came now, it's not nearly as complicated. We focus a lot on head, heart, hands. What do you know? What can you teach someone? And what's going to motivate you to take action? And I think that in every interaction, whether it's in an institution, whether it's a group, just a group that comes together, or whether it's a resident, we really are always trying to extract that information, leave every meeting knowing that about someone. And I think that us being conscious in that has helped us to build an incredible base of resources when we need things, people we can call, we can get things done quickly. It's a really good way to navigate, as opposed to the more depressing way that we could approach this community that was so challenged and remains challenged in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. Thank you for reminding us of the different, you could have taken a different approach, and that's what a lot of places do. And but I think the point is you wouldn't have had the same kind of impact, or deep impact, that you have had. And I kind of, you brought up an important point. I'm gonna throw this to Tony now. You were indicating, but where NECIC was birthed out of was a listening process. And I think it's interesting, the original impulse, if you will, of ABCD, right? That stance is listen first, observe, find the assets and resources and gifts, and listen for those from residents, the common aspirations. And you did that in a very intentional process to start this work. And I wonder if you care to share a little bit of the details of mechanics of how you did that. But then I would also love for you to explore with us, Tony, how does it look different, or what's different when the community is the center, and that, you know, institutions and organizations and programs are allies to the agenda that residents named and are living into? I mean, how is that different than, say, a different approach? But if you could say a little bit of the mechanics as well, that'd be really helpful, I think, for our listeners.
Sure. So it's actually, you know, an ongoing process that started back in, like, before I got there. Actually, those concerned residents that Deanna talked about, I think the very first project that they did was a door-to-door survey. So we had a lot of formal, you know, survey instruments and things that we were using, that we used back then, and then we updated that with the very first plan, and then we went back and did it again in like 2016, 17 for the second iteration of the plan. So I would say it's an ongoing process. We're trying to constantly reevaluate that we're listening to the folks in the neighborhood. But, you know, a lot of it happens anecdotally. A lot of it is through storytelling. A lot of it is things that, you know, you may not, they're almost unquantifiable sometimes. So we listen to a lot of that kind of stuff, and really through our programming, we were gathering, you know, convenings of people together, starting with our elders in the neighborhood, and, you know, what did they have to contribute? What did they care about? You know, and on down the line, we've worked with the faith community, listening to them, and what, you know, what are their parishioners telling them, and just really, you know, we call it transformative convening, and bringing those groups together around these issues that they care about. So to talk a little bit about sort of how it's different, I think ultimately, you know, in the most general sense, it's much easier to accomplish your goals when goals that people actually care about. You know, the disinvestment that happened, you know, schools didn't disappear from the neighborhoods with a very engaged citizenry. You know, it's all part of that decline, and you see people less and less engaged, and essentially, I think in the end, we're talking about creating citizens versus creating a client state. People that are taking an active role in their community, and I just think that, you know, that bottom up approach is always going to be better than a top down, you know, telling people what you think, as opposed to listening to what they know their own neighborhood, they know their community. So I hope I've answered your questions there.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm going to pick up from there. Thank you, Tony. Maybe turn it over to Mario for a second. Because Tony, you mentioned that this is an ongoing process, right? Where you don't listen once and that's it. You don't observe assets and once and that's it. It's always an ongoing body of work. And so Mario, I think you've been kind of key with that in keeping that process alive, working to discover, you know, what do we have, right? What are the assets and gifts we can build on, to connect residents to each other and to resources, to mobilize people to act around what they care about. So, but what does that look like? If you could share a little bit about that, you know, what's an average week for you? What does it look like to do that? And then if you could answer that first, and then I'll also ask you if there's a story that kind of is meaningful to you from that work. But let's start with sort of like, what's a day in the life of kind of thing. Yeah, and you're gonna have to unmute yourself.
So it's no average day in the life of an organizer. It's always something new. One of the good examples that I like to give is like 1 minute I'm you mean with Senator Brown, and then Sherman, who is somebody from our neighborhood who always comes around and always has something like, oh, my light, the light on my street is out. Both of those conversations are equally important as an organizer. I think all organizers are different based on their head, heart, hands, their skills and abilities, and obviously the makeup of their community. But one of the key tasks, as Tony talked about, is keeping residents engaged. And one of the best way that you can keep residents engaged is something that Deanna talked about, was understanding their head, heart, hands. If you can understand their head, heart, hands, when these different types of issues come up, like a school closing, I know who to go and grab that care that the school is closing. If it's about the local OC Hill closing, and I understand who in the community care enough about that to act. Another major thing as an organizer that you must understand is your community's asset map and capacity inventory. You've got to know the strengths and capabilities of the people, organizations, and institutions in your community.
Yeah, thank you. So helpful to get that, just get a picture of that. And maybe if we go that, second part of that question, like, from this work, what's a favorite story, something that's touched you?
Well, just maybe a month ago, we had one of our elders who is very, very engaged in our programming. She came in and had no idea what to do. She inherited a few years ago. She inherited a few homes from her dad. No property management. She's like, I got 2 houses. I don't know what to do with. More recently, the city got engaged. So the city got engaged, and they condemned her houses. Not knowing what to do, she came to us. The city was preparing to tear them down, and through that process, she was like, "Well, I don't want to be assessed the fee, which I think is $10,000 or something. She can't afford that." So working with her, we kind of figured out exactly what her wishes was. And she initially wanted to clean the property up and possibly get some people living in there. So working with one of our micro business participants, who was a contractor, cutting down trees and doing clean outs, he came through and cleaned it out for free for her, just because of the relationship that we had with him. Then she changed her mind. She didn't want to do that anymore. She just wanted to sell them. So through another relationship that we got through the micro business class, she, who was also another contractor who was looking to get into like the flipping game, we facilitated the conversation for him to buy the 2 homes from her, and now she turned a situation where she was about to be assessed about $20,000 out in the range, where she turned that into $50,000 profit. The contractor is about to make another 50 or so. I don't really know the numbers. And the first micro business participant that we that came and cleaned it out, the city was so happy with him that they basically invited him to bid on a contract that's coming up, that'll be coming up in the next year or so, to do those kind of projects. So in this situation, we had 3 people that we work with win.
That's gives me tingles.
Yeah.
About. Wow, what could have been a disaster for someone.
Yeah.
Positive for multiple people. You created wealth instead of somebody losing wealth.
Yeah. We
Yeah,
had
that's
three
amazing.
people who could possibly come out on top. Just and this couldn't have happened without knowing, understanding, and connecting our community's assets.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I, part of the story I suspect is she came to you because you were a trusted, entity, a trusted partner. And I expect that part of that is because you've been in homes, you've visited, you've been
Mhm.
at the places they care about, you've been behind what they care about.
Yep.
So I imagine that that creates a different relationship, and so they can have. Felt she could come and talk to you. So really, really insightful. The impact. If I could go along with those lines, I want to keep drilling in on this impact idea. So Tony, you do a lot with research and data and so forth for the organization. I don't know about you, but I get the question sometimes, okay, that's great. I understand the principle of ABCD. It sounds nice, but where's the proof? Okay, does it really work? Does it make a difference? Now, of course, we had a story here where a net loss to the neighborhood of 20,000 got turned into 100,000 off the top, plus more jobs out of that. So that's one example. We have anecdotal evidence. And I wonder how else you might answer that question next time someone comes ask me that.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, a very complex question, really. The sort of the low hanging fruit answer, at least in our community, because this is going to be different for everybody. Back when we started, there were so many dilapidated homes and vacant lots and just blight of all kinds. Hundreds of homes have come down in that neighborhood now. And so it's a visible, a very, very visible difference. I'd love to say, median household incomes have gone up in the last 10 years. That's a lot more complex, unfortunately, and we're working towards it. And it took decades to get there. It's not going to change, overnight. So you can think in terms of just numbers of engagement. When lots of people are interested in things, and it's not just because they're complaining about something. I think that's a good indicator. And I also think that what Deanna mentioned earlier is a huge thing, in that what I would say sort of the change in the community's culture and climate, so to speak. It really is. It's hard to overemphasize the difference now. It was very deficit based here, a very negative lens, very looking to the past and I just think that in and of itself it speaks to the efficacy of this model. And there's still work to be done. So hopefully I can come back and say, hey, household incomes are way up now, and we're the leading engine of economic activity in Mansfield, but we're still working on those things. So
Yeah, for sure. I kind of picture it as dominoes, right? So in order to get to that place where you do have, and I expect that, I bet I'd be willing to bet money on that you've had drops in crime and some of those kinds of indicators. But some of those bigger indicators like household income and so forth, we get there. But the first domino to drop has to be the shift, right, and the culture and attitude.
Well, one challenge that we have noticed in our sort of data collection is the way different agencies collect different types of data that really makes it difficult to put, to sort of say in our neighborhood, this is happening. We can say, oh, in the city, in the county, these things are happening, but it's very difficult to get it down to that level. But yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So there's one other thing that I want to kind of drill down a little bit on with you, Deanna. One of the things that just impresses me so much within ECIC, funding this kind of work that is community centered is not the easiest thing. And so you've both built up the programs the residents have said they want and are, a part of and making happen. And so you found program money and used it strategically to support the resident agenda. And then you've also found money somehow to bring in the Marios of the organization to keep doing that work of building, connecting people to each other, to resources, mobilizing around what they care about. That's hard money to do, hard money to get. So I don't know if you care to share anything, what's your secret sauce, tips and tricks? I don't know, how do you do it?
I think when you talk about complexity, I think that's probably the most complex thing. First, I think that we had to be committed to change, in that something's always changing. Tony has been an incredible asset to this organization and to the neighborhood, to our whole community, through his data collection. None of us are professional planners. Tony and I literally, we had no clue what we were doing when we started this, but we started with a very, very committed funder. And that funder was exploring a different way called embedded funding. I was an employee of the city of Mansfield. I was running a city department and a neighborhood center. And for me to be a single or recently divorced mom and give up my security to go off on something like this was very scary for me. And so the one thing that did happen was we were held very, very accountable in terms of the deliverables. We were provided with a lot of support through another community organizer from Minneapolis who came here, worked with us. When the day we opened our doors, as I said, John McKnight came to our office and trained our staff directly. So I think that there's a lot of things that went into that. That funder paid for me to go to additional leadership training, sent me to Harvard, their executive education program for creating collaborative solutions. So I think that if we're using the language of ABCD, a lot of who Mario is working with is that individual at the center and those circles. And the circles, as we know, kind of provide the quality of life. And that's what was missing so much in our neighborhood. Who I spend 90% of my time with is with the triangles. And I think that that is equally as important. I think a lot of times when we do community work, we just want to work in the community, and it doesn't achieve the outcomes that we need, because a lot of times there's assets outside of the community that we need to connect to. So I think we've been really, really good at having a focus on both. I think that funding the position of a community organizer is incredibly difficult. We've often, you'll have to have a grant or something to help pay for them, which means they're going to have to do something else, which can kind of take them away from that. One way that we tried to do that, we had a phenomenal community organizer just before Mario, who passed away in 2019. And we didn't even hire an organizer until we found the right one, just because that is the critical piece here. She was very committed to anti-violence work, and she was doing that work before we got her. And that's why we brought her, because violence was an increasing issue over the years. That while we had seen, there have been over 500 demolitions, which was what residents wanted, was all that blighted housing. We're now probably better positioned than anywhere in the whole city for new development and new housing to be built, just because of the engagement of residents throughout the years, connected to the triangles, meaning being connected to the city. We had a monthly meeting. They could come and present problem properties, and within a couple months, they were being torn down left and right. So as resources came into the city, we were prepared. We were very prepared. We had residents lined up. We knew exactly what needed to be done. And having been a city official before, I know how important that is. We went in with data. Tony had done an incredible amount of the hard data capturing, but also we had the resident input, the anecdotal data from our surveys and things. And we continue to do that throughout. And then as the organization has grown, we've laid infrastructure in the community for certain things that we weren't prepared to do yet. We weren't ready to do housing. We didn't have the capacity to do it. but we did have the capacity to start clearing land, and the residents wanted demolition. So we have made ourselves very committed to being able to change and go the way of the community. So wherever the broader resources in the community, if they're focusing on housing, we're ready. If they're focusing on jobs and small business development, we're ready. And then I'll wrap this up, but we also, a couple of years ago, focused really heavily on the African American population, and we had an employee who wrote an incredible report that we gave to our local foundation. This community is only about 8%. Our county is only about 8% African American, and yet we have some really significant challenges. And so we were able to provide them with a super comprehensive document about the state of the African American in Richland County, which immediately helped with funding immediately. So I think that was a really big deal. So laying out those partnerships, aligning those circles, those triangles, having good data, understanding wishes of the residents, and being able to be nimble and flexible all helped us, if that helps. Hope I didn't confuse you too much.
No, that's perfect. It's such a natural skill for you, and I just appreciate that so much. It's a hard place to be. Could you just briefly, you've mentioned circles and triangles, could you unpack that just a little bit? And you'll need to unmute yourself, I'm sorry.
So in the world of ABCD, and particularly in community organizing, there's an asset map that I'm speaking of, and that it's residents at the center. When we draw it with a resident with a gift. And so that gift is whatever is that motivation for them to that skill, that talent, the head, heart, hands. Then around that person are circles, and those are informal associations. And as I said, we see those as bringing the quality of life. Those are your scout troops, your after school programs, your music groups, your sports teams, things where people go because they're sharing a gift. And then the triangles would be the institutions, the businesses, local government, schools, systems, all of those, which is where I said I spend almost all of my time, because we needed to organize those assets just like we needed to organize the circles and the people. And then all that's occurring within 3 census tracts, which is a square represented as a square. That's a census tract 6, 7, and 16, which comprises what we call the North End. And then of course there's a culture within that, there's an economy within that. And so having a good understanding of that, which is really where the plan comes in and kind of talks to us about the economy. And then the culture, I'm a former resident, Mario is a resident. Most of our staff now, I think, are residents have been at one point residents of the North End. We have 13 full-time employees. So I think having all of that and an understanding of that asset map is really, really key.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Really helpful to think of that direction. We're going to transition now, folks, to some Q&A time. So be ready, start dropping in your questions in that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. As we transition, I do want to say a couple of things. You know, we've been talking a lot about gifts, and a gift isn't a gift until it's given, right? Time, talent, and treasure are key categories of gifts. So I just want to say briefly ways that you can get engaged around those categories. If like me, you have felt really compelled by what's emerged from this conversation so far. As far as time and talent, think about staying connected to the movement. And one way you can do that is you could go to greatlakеsurban.org and find under engagement, find Stay Connected. And you can sign up for a newsletter, and you can sign up for, or you can follow our Facebook page and LinkedIn page. And this is where we'll announce things. This is where we'll give you updates and stories. And we won't inundate you, but that's one way to do it, to stay in touch with the movement. Another thing to think about is this. If you, in case you don't know, September 28 comes around every year, and it's officially a day on the books that Congress passed back in the Carter administration, I think it was 76, So Good Neighbor Day. And you can look up nationalgoodneighborday.com. And a group of us have put together some resources. There's a map where you can put your zip code, and there's a pledge that you can take to say that, hey, the week of September 28th or any time throughout the year, that you'll do something in your neighborhood to make a difference. So get to the site, look at the resources, download the media toolkit, post something on your Facebook page, and let's do this. Let's make a change. Let's do some strategic acts of neighboring throughout the year, but especially that week of September 28th. The last thing I would mention has to do with the treasure side of this. And so one thing we haven't really explored deeply with the team yet, but I want you to know, one of the things that the North End neighborhood, the residents have said they want is they want a top-notch community center. And so NECIC is working toward that, and the rates, millions of dollars already. But anything you might be able to contribute to that would be much appreciated. It's going to provide for arts and culture and sports and a rooftop garden and you name it. And so please visit NECIC-ohio.org, and it's in the chat, and look them up and then write a check to the capital campaign or whatever. If you want to see new neighborhoods kind of brought into the movement and start to move toward the kind of sophistication that you've heard about today with the North End neighborhood and NECIC, that's the role that Great Lakes Urban plays. We incubate new neighborhoods on this journey through training and coaching, and providing the tools and the toolkit and mini grants that new neighborhoods need to get started on this journey. So you can do, if you wanted to, if that's your bailiwick, you can go to again greatlakеsurban.org, and you can give at the donate tab through a secure site. So with that, let's come to your questions. And here we have a question, says, talking about the triangles, who are the most important institutions you found to be instrumental?
Depends on what you're working on. It really, because the plan, I didn't really talk about that, but our plan covers 7 or 8 areas, like economic development, housing, community spaces, land use, public infrastructure, transit, health and safety. I think that's all of them, right, Tony? So within each of those categories, we have basically, you kind of are asset mapping each of those areas. So it depends on if you're working with public infrastructure, the city's going to be your main collaborator. If you're working on education, we work with K through university. So it really depends on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Overall, I think having your elected officials, our council people are critical. We work super closely with our local council people. Again, that's kind of from having been a council person and knowing how that worked. We are probably a council person's dream. I would have loved to have had an NECIC. For me, we cut out a lot of work for them, but so I think it really just depends. Always having your financial institutions, your school system, those things where residents are going, the people with whom your residents are going to be heavily impacted by would probably be the most important triangles to start with. But we work with every kind of triangle you can imagine. So we work with a lot of businesses as well. We have a staffing agency that is part of our nonprofit. And so that brings us into contact with employers. And when we have people who maybe have compromised backgrounds or things like that, we've built a relationship with those triangles to kind of help bridge a gap for some of our residents and some of our job seekers. So it just really depends.
Wonderful, thank you. Mario, Tony, would you add anything to that question?
I think the most important triangle is us. A lot of people don't realize it, but our organization is our triangle.
Yeah,
I would echo Deanna. I think the city is a huge one, but I think it does really depend on what you're trying to accomplish. But
yeah, that's great. And Mario, I really appreciate you said that, right? So, you are an organization, but you're an organization centered around what is the community's agenda, what's the community's assets, the community. You put community at the center. And so, but I wonder, maybe you could say a little bit about that. How can, if somebody's listening in and they are part of the part of an institution, and or they work for city government, they're part of a triangle, and they'd like to take this approach, right? They like to do ABCD. They would like to put the community at the center. What would you say to them?
That's a good one. I would say ask them. Like what we did. A lot of people, a lot of institutions come to us and say, well, what do the kids want? I always one of the big things that I say is, well, I'm not a kid no more. I don't know. I can go find you some kids that'll tell you what they want, but you got to ask them. So we've done a really good job of asking the people we serve what are the things that they care about. What do they want us to focus on? We got we built in it's at 12 million right now, I think, dollar facility that the residents told us that they wanted. Nothing in that building are things that we wanted other than our offices, but the gym people asked for, the boxing gym. We originally didn't have a boxing gym, and when we released our first iteration of plans, the community said, well, hey, you forgot a boxing gym, and that got added the second round. The art studios, that's all. The podcast and esports studios, that's all stuff that the community asked us for. So if I circling back to the question, I would just ask the people you serve.
Yeah, that's great. Is that leaning into the question, right? Let's make that the first impulse.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. All right. So the flip side then is circles, right? So I'm getting some questions here about circles or that side of it. Yeah, so what do you do there, right? So what's the first step toward getting more of that, more of the care and the association and connectivity? How do you get more of that to happen?
I think it's what we talked about earlier, understanding what people care about enough, the head, heart, hands. If you know what they care about enough, what they know enough about, you can start connecting those things and start building these circles in your community. If you know 3 people who really like to sing, and you connect those 3 together, and now they meet once a quarter or once a month or once a week to sing together. Now you got a circle. That's a circle right there. That's if you find a young man who wouldn't mind taking a bunch of kids to the park to the park on once a week, and now he formed a circle. That's an association. Sometimes it's just getting the little wins, and then those little wins turn into bigger wins, and now we got somebody who care enough to have a youth recreation program.
Yeah, that's awesome. Deanna, it looks like you're trying to
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to that really quickly. One of the difficult things for us when we first started, because I was a resident when we started, and several people like our board and so forth. Which I should say, we are, as I said, we're a triangle, and so there have been times where it's very difficult to be a triangle because we finally had to say we're a triangle that supports circles. That's really how we've tried to see it, because we are still a business. This is still work. This is still a job. And so we don't function as a circle, even though our heart may be in it, we don't function as a circle. And I think that is something, and the circles are generally going to self-organize as well. So we can't create circles for people. But we can support them. And so ways that we try to support circles are through small grants. We offer $250 grants for residents, 3 or more residents who come up with projects or things for the public good. We support the creation and expansion of community gardens, which was a huge thing for us, and how people coalesced around that work, which has ended up with us having a 12-acre urban farm. So I think that it's really important to show the distinction. And one thing that was impacting our neighborhood that we could see that is very evident was the absence of circles. And so we hear things like multi-systemic youth. That's that individual at the center surrounded by triangles, whether it's, they're in the school system, the court system, so forth, the social service system. That's what our neighborhood really was. We were losing our circles, and we were being surrounded, which goes directly against, trying to replace the natural care and concern of a neighborhood by an institution. You can't do it. So that can be a big jump for an organization. I think it's difficult sometimes, particularly when you're full of the people from the neighborhood, and also our board are 51% residents, so that we are always being governed by residents. So we've tried to find that sweet spot in between being, we're a triangle with rounded edges, we say.
I love
We're
it.
a circular triangle.
Oh gosh. Oh, that's great. Let's see, another question here asks, what do you think is the most underappreciated or misunderstood asset?
Collaboration.
Residents.
Oh,
They both sound really good. Maybe we each unpack those two.
yeah.
Deanna, why do you say residents?
I say residents because I think that and it usually would come from a triangle, but you'll hear things like just ways that residents are spoken of is from a very deficit-based perspective. Not really seen as having, particularly in low-income neighborhoods, again, where you have lots of people being surrounded by triangles. And so the agency that they feel they have over their own lives is often limited, and thus their community. And so I think that it's important that we recognize that I think the most misunderstood person was a North End resident. I really do. I think that people looked at that whole community, and I personally feel like, I've been a misunderstood North End resident at the time. So that's probably what I think was the most underappreciated asset, but we would not have anything without them. So they're pretty important.
Yeah,
That was a really good answer, and I changed my answer to hers.
yeah, and we'll accept that. About what were you thinking when you said collaborative?
Collaboration. What I was thinking was at NECIC we got certain assets and things that we are really good at, but other organizations got things that they're really good at. And without each other, it just don't work. But when we combine our assets in grant writing and dealing with certain issues, then we can make a lot more headway.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. So we're about out of time. And I apologize if you have other questions. We'll try to answer those in other ways, our Facebook page, etc. But maybe we could do a lightning round, and we could just kind of go. Maybe Mario, you could lead the charge, and Tony and Deanna. What would you like to leave us with? What's a hope you're bringing in forward for this work, for the movement, for the North End, and why should people invest in this different way of doing business? So Mario.
Well, one of the things that keep me hopeful about this work is things like today, or lights, but things like today, where people come together to learn about ABCD. All the people who will go back and watch this and apply it to their communities. At NECIC, we are especially excited to continue to build on the skills of our local residents, the power of associations and supportive networks of institutions to be a model for other communities to follow.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mario.
You're welcome.
Tony?
That's tough to top, but I would say that it's such an intuitive model. I really think that it's almost natural, and maybe I'm speaking only for myself, but it seems very natural to want to look at the bright side of things, to try to, you're not going to do anything with a deficit. It's really difficult to build on that. So I just think it's a much more intuitive way of looking at it.
For sure. Thank you, Tony. Deanna?
I would say I'm most hopeful, not just for the North End, but for our entire community. As I've said, there just have been so many changes, just so many. It's a completely different environment. It's very difficult to be touting your community's assets and entering meetings and things. And the other 3/4 of the city are complaining about it. So as I said, there's been a whole language that has changed in our community. There's a whole different mood. There is a lot of optimism. We have a lot of newer, younger leaders who we've been able to influence a lot. They've been very involved with our work in their respective jobs. And so they like it better. They mimicked our downtown, very much mimicked our community process, and created a Mansfield Rising downtown plan that focuses on the assets. And so they're doing the work and don't realize it, or have been for a while. And so I think for us, it's been really wonderful for the North End, because people have joined us in changing the perspective that we look at our community, the residents, our institutions, our associations, and all of that. So I think for me, it's just been, there's such a ripple effect. You can't exist next to us without kind of changing your view of your own neighborhood. So, so I think that's been really, really huge. And it's something that I did not expect.
Yeah, so wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And once again, just thank you for being on with us. Deanna, Tony, Mario, you're my heroes. So I really appreciate you, and what a delight to be able to share you and your story and your energy, and the lessons that you've learned through the years, to be able to share that with a broader audience. It's really, today's a special day for me, and I just appreciate you. Folks, if you're listening in, hopefully this has been helpful. This has been recorded, and it'll be put up on our YouTube channel. And so you can look back and remember some of the lessons learned along the way. I want to thank everybody for joining us for this quarter's Lunch and Learn. And again, follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn, and let's stay connected. And once again, thank you all. Happy neighboring.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, for sure.